Welcome back, everybody. Today we will be reading Chapter 5, so let's get into it. Within a decade of its discovery by Batarian surveyors, Kamala had become one of the most important planets in the Skyllian Verge. Unlike most colony worlds, where initial populations were small and settlers tended to congregate around a single major city, Kamala boasted two distinct metropolitan regions of over 1 million people each. Ujon, the capital, and the slightly larger Hetre, location of the world's primary spaceports. The two cities were nearly 500 kilometers apart, built on opposite sides of a wide, inhospitable desert, the source of Kamala's rapid growth. For below the thin layer of orange sand and the hard red rock underneath were some of the largest deposits of element zero in the Verge. The rich deposits of Ezo, the galaxy's most valuable fuel source, drove Kamala's economy, drawing in colonists eager to seek their fortunes, working at the hundreds of mining and refinery operations scattered across the empty desert. The majority of the world's population were Batarians, and only they enjoyed the full privileges of true citizenship under local law. But like any colony world with a prosperous economy, there was always a steady influx of visitors and immigrants from every recognized species across Citadel space. Kamala was easily the wealthiest of the Batarian colony worlds, and Edon Hadda was one of the wealthiest Batarians on Kamala. He was quite likely among the 10 richest individuals in the entire Skyllian Verge, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Normally, he wore the latest in cutting-edge fashions, Asari-designed ensembles, made with the finest materials imported from Thessia itself. His preference ran to the opulent and extravagant, flowing black robes highlighted with splashes of red to bring out the hues of his skin. Excuse me. Goodness. But for the meeting tonight, he had donned a simple brown suit covered by a drab gray overcoat. For someone as infamously ostentatious as Eden Hadda, his plain garb was an almost impenetrable disguise. Typically, Eden would be enjoying a soothing nightcap at this hour, sipping the finest of Hanar liquors in the den of his mansion in Ujon. But this night was positively atypical. Instead of relaxing in comfort and luxury, he was stuck sitting on a hard chair in a dingy warehouse in the desert outside Hatter. I'm going to assume that's called Hatter, H-A-T-R-E. Hatter. Waiting for the Verge's most infamous bounty hunter to arrive. Eden didn't like waiting. He wasn't waiting alone. At least a dozen other men, all members of the Blue Sun mercenary gang, were milling about the warehouse. 6 of them were Batarian, 2 were Turian, and the rest were human. Eden didn't like humans either. Like his own species, they were bipedal. Similar in height, the humans were thicker in the torso, arms, and legs. They had short, stubby necks and square, blockish heads. And like all binocular species, their faces seemed lacking in character and intelligence. Instead of nostril slits, they had an odd jutting protuberance for a nose. Even their mouths were strange, their lips so full and puffy it was a wonder they didn't slur their speech, as I'm doing all day. He actually thought they closely resembled the Asari, another race Eden didn't like. But he wasn't one to let personal prejudice get in the way of business. There were several other so-called private security organizations for hire in the Skyllian Verge, and most of them charged a lot less than the Blue Suns. But the Suns had developed a reputation for being both discreet and ruthlessly efficient. Eden had used them several times in the past when unconventional business opportunities had presented themselves. So he knew, from personal experience, that their reputation was well earned. He wasn't about to trust a mission as important as this one to someone else simply because the Suns had recently started taking on humans. Even though it had been a human member of the group who had screwed up on Elysium. Normally, Eden would never meet directly with the mercenaries he employed. He preferred to work through agents and go-betweens to keep his identity hidden, and also to avoid dealing with those who were socially beneath him. But the man he was hiring tonight had insisted on meeting him in person. Eden had no intention of bringing a bounty hunter into his home, or of meeting with him alone. So he donned the nondescript clothes, left his mansion, and traveled hundreds of kilometers by private plane to the outskirts of Ujon's twin city on the other side of the desert. Now he was spending the night in a cold, dusty warehouse filled with soldiers for hire, sitting in a chair that was causing his back to ache and his legs to go numb, and the bounty hunter was over an hour late. But it wasn't as if he could change his mind. He was in too deep. The Blue Suns in the warehouse knew his identity. Now he'd have to keep them around as his personal bodyguards until this job was finished. It was the only way to make sure they didn't reveal his identity to the rest of the Blue Sun crew. What happened at Sidon was going to draw attention, and Eden couldn't take the risk of someone exposing his involvement. He also needed to make sure there were no loose ends that could link him to the attack, which was why he had agreed to this meeting. "He's here." Eden jumped slightly in the voice. One of the Blue Suns, a fellow Batarian, had crept up silently behind him and was now standing close enough to whisper in his ear. "Bring him in," he replied, quickly regaining his composure. The merc nodded and left the room as his employer stood up, grateful to be out of the uncomfortable chair. A moment later, the guest of honor finally appeared. He was easily the most impressive Krogan Eden had ever seen. At 2.5 meters tall and nearly 200 kilograms, he was large even by the standards of his reptilian species, but not enormous. Like all Krogan, the top of his spine was slightly curved, giving him a hunched-back appearance. The effect was further enhanced by the heavy frill of bone and scaled flesh growing from his upper back, collar, and shoulders, like a thick shell from which his blunt head protruded. Rough, leathery plates covered the crown of his skull and nape of his neck. His features were flat and brutish, almost prehistoric. He had no visible nose or ears, and his eyes were small and set wide on either side of his head, though they gleamed with a cruel cunning. A Krogan could live for several centuries, his or her complexion growing duller and darker with age. This one's skin was all mottled browns and tans, with almost no remaining trace of the pale yellow and green markings common to younger members of the species. A labyrinth of discolored welts and scars crisscrossed his face and throat, ancient battle wounds forming a disfiguring pattern, as if all his veins were on the verge of bursting through the surface of his skin. He wore light body armor, but he carried no weapons. Those would have been removed at the door, as per Eden's previous orders. Despite being unarmed, he still radiated an aura of menace and destruction. The Krogan walked with an odd, limbering grace, a force of nature rolling across the floor of the warehouse, merciless and unstoppable. 4 Blue Suns escorted him in, 2 marching on either side. They were there to intimidate the bounty hunter and dissuade him from any aggressive responses if the negotiations went poorly. But it was clear that they were the ones who felt intimidated. Their tension was obvious in every step. They moved as if they were standing on the edge of a volcano about to erupt. One of them, a young human with a Blue Sun tattoo covering his left eye, kept reaching down to the pistol at his side, as if trying to draw courage from the mere act of touching it. Eden would have found their discomfort amusing if he hadn't been relying on them for protection. The Batarian decided he would do everything in his power to make sure this meeting went smoothly. As the Krogan approached, his lips pulled back in a snarl, exposing his serrated teeth. Or maybe it was a smile. He stopped a few steps away, still flanked on either side by the 4 mercenaries. "My name is Scar," he growled, his voice so deep it sent thrumming vibrations across the floor. "I am Eden Haddah," the Batarian replied, giving a slight tilt of his head to the left, a gesture of admiration and respect among his species. Scar tilted his own head in response, but he leaned to the right, a greeting usually directed at inferiors. Eden bristled involuntarily. Either Scar was insulting him, or the Krogan didn't understand the significance of the gesture. He chose to proceed as if it was the latter explanation, though, from what he knew of Scar, there was a good chance it was the former. "I don't normally agree to meet with the people I hire," he explained. "But in your case, I chose to make an exception. Based on your reputation, your skills are worth bending the rules for." Scar dismissed the compliment with a derisive snort. "Based on your reputation, I thought you'd be better dressed. You sure you can afford me?" There were some shocked murmurs from the other Batarians in the room, casting aspirations on the monetary worth of a social. Better was a grave insult among their culture. Again, Eden wondered if Scar had done this on purpose. Fortunately, he was used to dealing with the less cultured species of the galaxy, and he wasn't hiring Scar because he was of his renowned etiquette. "Rest assured, I have sufficient funds to pay you," he replied, his voice calm and even. "It is a simple job." "This have anything to do with the Sidon base?" Eden's inner eyes blinked once, registering his surprise. Negotiation was a subtle dance of deception and misinformation, each party holding secrets from the other in an effort to gain the upper hand. And Eden had just slipped up. His involuntary reaction had revealed a fact he'd meant to keep hidden, if the Krogan was smart enough to pick up on it. "Sidon? Why would you think that?" he asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Scar shrugged his massive shoulders. "Just a hunch. And my price just went up." "Your involvement only requires you to find and eliminate your target," Eden countered. His voice gave nothing away, but inside he was silently cursing himself for losing the first round of bargaining. "Target? Just one." "Just one. A female human." The Krogan turned his head from side to side, scanning the dozen or so Blue Sun mercs scattered about the warehouse. "You've got a lot of men here. Why don't you make them do your dirty work?" Eden hesitated. He preferred to ask the questions. He didn't like answering them. He was wary of making another mistake in their negotiation, but even his reluctance gave away more than he intended. Scar barked out a laugh. "These Rancors screwed it up, didn't they?" Every merc in the warehouse tensed up at his words, confirming them as fact. But, not that it mattered. Somehow, Eden knew Scar would see through any false denials, so he simply nodded, conceding another point to his opponent. "What happened?" the Krogan wanted to know. "I hired the Blue Suns to find her and bring her in for interrogation," Eden admitted. "One of them spotted her on Elysium. They found him several hours later crawling around a side street looking for his teeth." "That's what happens when you're too cheap to hire a real professional." One insult too many. The man with the tattoo whipped his pistol out and slammed the butt against the side of the Krogan's skull. The force of the blow rocked Scar's head to the side, but it did not knock him off his feet. He wheeled around with a deafening roar, catching his attacker with a vicious backhand that broke the young man's neck. The other 3 mercs fell on Scar before their comrade's body hit the ground, their combined weight dragging the big alien to the floor. Before the meeting, Eden had given them strict orders not to kill Scar unless absolutely necessary. He needed him to track down the missing woman, so instead of shooting the bounty hunter, all 3 were piled up on top of him, pinning him to the ground as they tried to pistol whip him into unconsciousness. Unfortunately, nobody had told Scar he couldn't kill them. A long, jagged blade appeared in his hand, materializing from some secret hiding place in his boot, belt, or glove. Eden jumped back from the fray as the blade gashed open the throat of one merc. The return arc sliced through the vulnerable joint between the knee and thigh in the body armor of a second, severing his femoral artery. As he instinctively clutched at the gushing wound with both hands, Scar drove the blade into his chest, piercing his protective vest and puncturing his heart. The blade momentarily stuck in the rib cage as the Krogan tried to pull it out, giving the last surviving merc, another human, the chance to roll away from the pile and scramble to his feet, safely out of the knife's range. The human whipped out his pistol and pointed it at the gore-covered bounty hunter, who was still on the floor. "Don't move!" the man screamed, his voice cracking with fear. Scar's head snapped from side to side, ignoring the enemy in front of him as he took stock of the 8 other mercs in the warehouse. Every single one of them had their assault rifles trained on him, ready to fire. The knife dropped to the floor and Scar raised his empty hands above his head as he slowly stood up. He turned to face Eden as the merc with the pistol took a few steps further back, just to be safe. "So what happens now, Batarian?" Eden finally had the upper hand in their negotiations, and he was eager to press his advantage. "Maybe I should just order them to kill you where you stand." He kept his inner eyes focused on Scar, but let the other pair glance around the room to draw attention to the fact that the bounty hunter was surrounded. The Krogan merely laughed at the empty threat. "If you wanted me dead, they'd have shot me before I had the chance to pull my knife. But they didn't. You must have given them orders not to take me out, so I figure I'm worth more to you than a handful of dead mercs. My price just went up again." Even with a warehouse full of armed mercenaries pointing their weapons at him, the Krogan was perceptive enough to turn the situation to his profit. Underestimating Scar's intelligence was a mistake Eden vowed he wouldn't make again. He wondered how many other people had underestimated Scar in the past, and what it had cost them. "You could have made a lot of money in my line of work, Scar." He made no attempt to hide his grudging respect. "I make a lot of money in this line of work, and I get to kill people as one of my perks, so let's stop screwing around and make a deal." Eden gave a slight nod and blinked all 4 of his eyes at once, signaling the mercs to lower their weapons. They weren't happy that Scar had killed 3 of their comrades, but loyalty meant less to them than money. And with the 3 dead, their cut just got larger. Only the young human closest to the Krogan, the one with the pistol, didn't comply. He looked around in disbelief at the others, his weapon still aimed directly at Scar. "What are you doing?" he shouted to the others. "We can't just let him get away with this." "Don't be stupid, boy," Scar spat out. "Killing me won't bring your dead friends back. It's just bad business." "You shut up," he snapped back, focusing all his attention on Scar. The Krogan's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Think hard about your next move, human. Nobody else is going to step in. It's just you and me." The merc was trembling now, but he managed to keep the pistol aimed at his target. Scar didn't seem concerned. "You've got to count to the count of 3 to drop that gun." "Or what?" the merc screamed. "You make one move and you're dead." 1. Eden noticed the Krogan was suddenly surrounded by a faint aura, barely visible even with the benefit of 2 pairs of eyes. There was a subtle waver around the bounty hunter, as if the light in the room were being ever so slightly distorted as it passed through the surrounding air. Scar was a biotic. The Krogan was one of those rare individuals capable of manipulating dark energy, the imperceptible quantum force that pervaded all the so-called empty space in the universe. Normally, too weak to have any noticeable effects on the physical world, dark energy could be concentrated into extremely dense fields by biotics through mental conditioning. With their natural talents augmented by thousands of microscopic amplifiers surgically implanted throughout their nervous system, biotic individuals could use biofeedback to release the accumulated power in a single directed burst, which was exactly what Scar was doing. stalling for time as he gathered enough power to unleash it against the young man still foolishly holding a gun on him. But the merc didn't realize what was happening. Humanity didn't have any individuals with latent biotic abilities. Eden suspected he wasn't even aware such a power existed. But he was about to find out. 2. The merc opened his mouth to say something, but he never got the chance. Scar thrust a clenched fist in his direction, and the air rippled as a wave of invisible dark energy surged out and over his adversary. The unsuspecting human was picked up off his feet and thrown backwards several meters. He landed heavily on the floor, knocking the wind out of his lungs and sending the pistol flying from his hand. He was stunned only for a second, plenty of time for Scar to cross the distance between them and wrap his 3-fingered hand around the merc's throat. He raised the human to the ceiling, easily holding him with one arm as he slowly crushed his windpipe. The merc kicked his dangling heels and clawed at the scaly forearm, choking the life from him to no avail. Your death comes at the hands of a true Krogan battlemaster, Scar casually informed him as his victim's face turned bright red, then blue. I hope you appreciate the honor. The rest of the Blue Suns stood by and did nothing, watching the whole affair with cold disdain. From their expressions, Eden could tell they weren't enjoying the spectacle, but none of them was willing to step in and put a stop to it, not if it meant offending their employer, or incurring the Krogan's wrath. The merc's struggles grew weaker. Then his eyes rolled back up into his skull and he went still. Scar shook him once, then gave a final squeeze, completely collapsing his trachea before dropping him disdainfully to the floor. I thought you said he had to the count of 3, Eden remarked. I lied. An impressive display, Eden admitted, nodding his head in the direction of the bodies. I only hope you have similar results with Kaylee Sanders. Of course, you'll have to find her first. I'll find her, the Krogan replied with absolute conviction. That's what I do. John Grissom woke to the sound of someone pounding on his door in the middle of the night. Grumbling, he rolled out of bed and threw on a tattered housecoat, though he didn't bother tying it closed. Any visitor rude enough to get him out of bed at this hour could damn well suffer through seeing him in his boxers. He'd actually been expecting something like this ever since he'd heard Sidon had been attacked. Either someone from Alliance brass showing up to try and convince him to make some kind of public appearance or official statement, or some reporter looking to get the reaction of one of humanity's most recognizable icons. Whichever it was, they were out of luck. He was retired now. He was done being a hero. He was sick of being some kind of symbol for all of humanity. Now, he was just a cranky old man living off his officer's pension. He flicked on a light in the hall and winced at the brightness, still trying to shake off the last vestiges of groggy sleep. He plodded his way slowly from the bedroom, tucked away in the back of his small single-story dwelling, toward the front door. The pounding continued, growing more insistent and frantic. "God damn it, I'm coming!" he shouted, but he didn't bother to pick up his pace. At least the noise wouldn't wake the neighbors. There weren't any. Not close enough to hear, anyway. As far as he was concerned, that was the main selling feature of the house. Elysium had seemed like a good place to retire. The colony was far enough away from Earth and other major settlements to dissuade people from making the trip out of simple curiosity. And with a population of several million, Elysium was large enough for him to just disappear among the masses. Not to mention it was safe, stable, and secure. He could have found somewhere even more remote, but on less established colony, he'd run the risk of being looked at as some type of savior or de facto leader whenever something went wrong. It wasn't perfect, though. When he'd first arrived on Elysium 5 years ago, local politicians had pestered him constantly, either wanting him to run on their party's behalf or looking for an endorsement of their own candidacy. Grissom chose to remain completely fair and unbiased. He told every single one of them to go to hell. After the first year, people stopped bothering him. Every 6 months or so, he'd still get a short video message from the Alliance encouraging him to come back and help serve humanity. He was only in his 50s, too young to sit around and do nothing, they'd say. He never bothered to reply. Grissom figured he'd already done plenty to serve humanity. His military career had always come first. It had cost him his family. But that was just the beginning. There was the 5-year media circus that had followed his pioneering journey through the Chiron relay. Thousands upon thousands of interviews. Things only got worse after his efforts during the First Contact War. More interviews, public appearances, private conferences with admirals, generals, and politicians, official diplomatic ceremonies to meet with representatives of every freaky mutant species of alien the Alliance ran into. Now, he was done. Let someone else take the banner and run with it. He just wanted to be left the hell alone. And then, some jackasses had to go and attack an Alliance base right on Elysium's doorstep, galactically speaking. It was inevitable somebody would figure this was a good enough excuse to resume bothering him again. But did they have to do it in the middle of the goddamn night? He was at the door, and the pounding hadn't let up at all. If anything, it had gotten more urgent and intense the longer he took. As he unlocked the door, Grissom decided he would tell the visitor to piss off if they were from the Alliance. If it was a reporter, he'd punch him, or her, right in the mouth. A terrified young woman stood at the door, shaking in the cold darkness. She was covered in so much blood, it took him a second to recognize her. "Kaylee?" "I'm in trouble," she said in a quavering voice. "I need your help, Dad." And that's it for Chapter 5. We'll see you guys next week with Chapter 6.